Hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I went a little overboard on the title, so I will not read it. Before we begin, I want to make a content acknowledgement. In this seminar, we're going to be discussing subjects including death, cancer, and mental health. So just want to sort of open with that. We are also going to be referring to lyrics by the musician Mount Erie, kind of a considerable amount. I'll put lyrics on the screen for you all, but if you want, I compiled the lyrics of all the songs that we'll be referring to in the seminar today, and you are welcome to scan the QR code to pull that up on your device if you see fit. Just a little note for me. This material is in some ways very raw and very personal to me, so I kind of want to avoid my characteristic tendency of going far, far off script. So an apology in advance if I feel like my eyes are down here more than they are with you all. I'm very excited to be sharing this with you all this afternoon. So with that, I would like to begin again. While I will be discussing the subject with great care, this seminar and its primary texts engage with death, cancer, and the vulnerability of the sometimes graphic artwork that we make in response to death. It is my belief and my hope that what we engage with and discuss today will leave us all feeling hopeful. With that said, I want to begin with a quote by the music critic Lester Bangs, who says, "The only questions worth asking today are whether humans are going to have any emotion tomorrow, and what the quality of life will be if the answer is no." Part one. As a poet and writing teacher, I am professionally obligated to believe that poetry and all forms of writing are the most important vessels we have to express our abstract emotions using concrete language. Truly, our pains are reminders that while sometimes sharp, while sometimes cruel, remind us that we are alive. I am inclined to agree with Lester Bangs, and this is no clearer than in the autobiographical album A Crow Looked at Me, written by Phil Elverum, who records under the name Mount Erie. In the album's liner notes, Elverum tells us that these songs were written and recorded August 31st to December 6th, 2016, in the same room where Geneviève, his wife and the mother of their young daughter, died, using mostly her instruments, her guitar, her bass, her pick, her amp, her old family accordion, writing the words on her paper, looking out the same window. Released shortly after, in March 2017, A Crow Looked at Me begins with the song Real Death, where Elverum tunefully laments, "Death is real. Someone's there, and then they're not." He later remarks in the song, "It's dumb, and I don't want to learn anything from this. I love you." The plain language of confessional writing is disarmingly intimate, as it is seemingly directed at the singer's late spouse. The power the art has is immediately apparent to listeners. There's something almost voyeuristic about listening to these lyrics, even having them read aloud. To hear the song is a whole other experience. And I want to play a sample of that song for you all. Mount Erie is an interesting study, not only in lyrics, but also in genre. Elverum first emerged in the independent rock music scene in the mid to late 90s, performing experimental noise music, making use of tape loops, samples, conventional instrumentation that was heavily affected to produce orally challenging music under the name The Microphones. The Glow Part 2, which was released coincidentally on this very day in 2001, carries with it the baggage of September 11th's great collective trauma on the United States and the rest of the world. The Glow Part 2, which of course was written and recorded well before those tragic events in New York City, uses confessional lyrics contrasted with abrasive music to disorient listeners, which served two unintended purposes by the artist. One, to provide a simulacrum for post-9/11 confusion and dread, and two, to maintain a distance between the intimate details of the subject matter of the album and the listener's experience with Elverum's personal narrative. This distinction is key in understanding A Crow Looked at Me Later, which diminishes that distinction. After the success of The Glow Part 2, Elverum adopted the moniker Mount Erie, which was the same name as the Microphones' 2002 album, which would be his final release under that old name. Phil Elverum met Janvier Castry in 2003, and they were married the following year before recording and releasing the debut album as Mount Erie. Elverum continued releasing albums that received critical acclaim. In 2015, 4 months after the birth of their first child, though, Janvier was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She passed away on July 9th, 2016. Elsewhere in the liner notes for A Crow Looked at Me, Elverum writes, "Why share this much? Why open up like this? Why tell you, stranger, about these personal moments, the devastation and the hanging love? Our little family bubble was sacred for so long. We carefully held it behind a curtain of privacy when we'd go out and do art and our music selves, too special to share, especially in our hyper-shared, imbalanced times. Then we had a baby, and this barrier felt even more important. I still don't want to tell you my daughter's name. Then, in May 2015, they told us Janvier had a surprise bad cancer, advanced pancreatic, and the ground opened up. What matters now, we thought. Then on July 9th, 2016, she died at home, and I belonged to nobody anymore. My internal moments felt like public property. The idea that I could have a self or personal preferences or songs eroded down to an absurd idea left over from a more self-indulgent time before I was a hospital driver, a caregiver, a child raiser, a griever. I am open now, and these songs poured out quickly in the fall, watching the days gray over and watching the neighbors across the alley tear down and rebuild their house. I make these songs and I put them into the world to multiply my voice saying, I love her. I want it known. Now, is this background necessary for enjoying the music? This gives us two branching questions. First, the original. Do we need to know the personal narrative that informs the songs of A Crow Looked at Me? And second, what does it mean to enjoy subject matter as nakedly painful as, to return to the lyrics of Real Death, the artist insisting that it's not for singing about, it's not for making into art. When death enters the house, all poetry is dumb. Are we wrong to, against the directly stated intentions of the artist, wanting to learn something from this? Perhaps this question is cause to return to Lester Bangs, who said every great work of art has two faces, one towards its own time and one toward the future, toward eternity. Is Mount Erie's music for us to share in an experience, while Phil Elverum's experience is his alone? He sings, when I walk into the room where you were and look into the emptiness instead, all fails. My knees fail, my brain fails, words fail. And yet, according to Metacritic, a website aggregate for music reviews, the words, lyrics, and melodies of A Crow Looked at Me very much do not fail. By the crude quantitative data of assessment, the album has met universal acclaim, averaging a score of 93 out of 100 and boasting a generally favorable user score of 8 out of 10. Pitchfork Media, the leading publication in independent music, gave A Crow Looked at Me a 9.0 and the coveted Best New Music accolade. The reviewer breathlessly hailed the album as being so simple, so tactile, so deceptively real. and that tragedy hasn't stopped Elverum from noticing the world. If anything, it seems to have pried his eyes open for good. This assertion, that Mount Erie's great noticing, that from a crow looked at me, Elverum says, most of this is beautiful and none of this is guaranteed. I am suddenly snapped back into the reality of the freshman English classroom. Let me explain. Part 2. Nobody listens anymore. Guy Montag, the protagonist of Ray Bradbury's novel Fahrenheit 451, observed during his messy self-actualization in response to, and in the beginning of his rejection of, the totalitarian government suppressing information and changing history by, among other methods, discouraging thoughtful communication between neighbors, friends, coworkers, and even marital partners. For my students that are here, I won't spoil the end of the novel. Please read tonight. But suffice to say, I am seeing many themes of the book playing out today in a way I am alarmed by. More on that in a bit. According to the Purdue Online Writing Lab, often referred to as the Purdue OWL, some of the key verbs for reading literary texts or engaging with literary analysis include notice, pay attention, reflect, ask, consider, and interpret, all of which maps over Bloom's taxonomy of measurable verbs to get students to critical thinking. As a service course in the humanities at a liberal arts institution like Ohio Dominican, being able to meet all these levels is crucial. Being able to articulate this benefit to students seated in a required course that is likely not in their chosen discipline, doubly crucial, lest I end up talking with myself about how I enjoyed last night's reading. Elsewhere in the lecture, where I am justifying the use of novel in a writing class and trying to articulate the value of a very old book to college freshmen in 2025, I share 3 interpretive practices defined by Rainey and Storm as quoted in teaching materials by Ashley Fox at the Community College of Allegheny County. Those 3 interpretive practices are noticing, identifying and analyzing features primarily found within the text. These are the pages and words themselves. 2, puzzling, the activity of framing productive questions that guide one's work with literary texts, then recursively pursuing those questions. We notice something interesting, we form a hypothesis, we go back into the text and see what we learn, which ideally gives us more to notice, we return with questions, and a great circle is formed. The 3rd step is theorizing, which is connecting the analysis of texts to interpretive communities and larger literary conversations, as well as historical, social, and political contexts and theories beyond the text. At that 3rd step, we get out of the great wheel with the text itself and examine context and history. Now, in English 110, the first semester freshman writing course, I primarily focus on the first 2 interpretive practices as they closely align with the learning objectives of typical first-year writing courses in my background discipline of rhetoric and composition and writing studies. I'm saving the theorizing for my excellent colleagues who teach literature courses that every student in this room should take all of after becoming English majors. Let's go back to Lester Bangs. Today I am struck by Mike Powell's pitchfork review of A Crow Looked at Me and the assertion that Elverum is noticing more, not less, is not numb for his pain, but like Lester Bang remarks, exploring the darkest corners of life, but still a quality of life met by the expertise of being a human having emotion. All of this is noticing, not just a core skill in the engagement of literary texts, but a necessary skill, it turns out, in the experience of being a human being. What Bangs is getting at universally, Powell locates within Phil Elverum's lyrics. It is a clear encapsulation of how we define the common good. Indeed, the sum conditions of social life which allow social groups or communities and their individual members relatively thorough and ready access to fulfillment of their basic human needs and rights. Noticing and puzzling over our pains and our joys, of course, are necessary for grieving and for living. They are also necessary for helping communities understand their collective experiences. I surmise that, like me, you have all been touched in some way by death, whether you have met it in loved ones close to you, or you have been so terribly close to it, but miraculously escaped. The definition of the common good doesn't shroud us from death, but it should empower us to create art about death and the space to enjoy, or at the very least experience art about death, that we might be better able to understand a symptom of life that we are all destined to. One final definition. Ohio Dominican alumni Vivian Claire Detweiler quotes Lemming and Dickinson in her honors thesis, which terms death as irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions, or irreversible cessation of all functions of the brain, including the brain stem. Detweiler goes on, death is both the end of life and the end of the world for the individual. This is concrete. However, another early lesson in freshman English is that language is merely a concrete vessel for abstract thinking. The miasma of experiences our individual brains process prior to its cessation are unintelligible without language. But language, as we all know, is a game of metaphors. As clearly as I hope I am communicating to you now, you are hearing me through walls. The walls of how I am trying to use the metaphor of language to relate to you, the metaphor of language through which you are hearing me, the metaphor of language by which we attempt to express a bodily cessation through the metaphor of a crow, as Elverum does in the song Crow, which concludes the album-length lyrical expression of insurmountable grief. Sweet kid, he sings to his daughter in a whisper. I heard you murmur in your sleep, crow. Crow, you said, crow. And I asked, are you dreaming about a crow? And there she was. Now, it is not entirely clear who the she is here. Is it an actual crow? Is it Janvier? Is it the specter of death? In Swims, Elverum shares another language's metaphor moment with his daughter, who asks, does mama swim? He sings in response, yes, she does. That's probably all she does now. In these exchanges, particularly for Elverum, the world, as Detweiler describes death to be, is not just over for Janvier, but perhaps also for Elverum in his emotional obliteration. And yet, he and Detweiler land on a similar comfort. She says, citing Catholic catechism, death is also a beginning. Death marks the end of sacramental life and the beginning of eternal life. Mount Erie relates this through pastoral language as metaphor, the cessation, the vanishing. He describes an image of his daughter's departed and swimming mother as, quote, what was you is now born across waves, evaporating. I believe that death is a terrible mystery despite its absolute certainty. I believe beyond that certainty is a great abstraction that we, members of the human family and the many communities to which we belong, have an ethical obligation and a moral calling to express and experience the metaphor of language as it tries to capture death, grief, and collective trauma. A Crow Looked at Me is a gift, a public service, a piece of common good when shared, understood, and subjected to literary analysis. Earlier, I mentioned Montag's sad observation, nobody listens anymore. And I think albums like A Crow Look at Me stand as a counterpoint to the conditions that help to withhold the humanity of the artless, conformist society in the pages of Fahrenheit 451. That is a coincidence. Another coincidence is how much of the book's message echoed my appeals to my students that writing and reading are important tools and outlets for the human condition to thrive, not just a way to get A's in your classes so that you may get a job, but so that you may thrive as a member of the human condition. They are a common good like a commodity, and that they help to inform the common good, like the status of our general wellness in experiencing life among each other. Another coincidence is how similar Montag's observation, nobody listens anymore, helps us to understand the misplacement or mistreatment of popular music within popular culture, specifically centered around the zeitgeist streaming platform Spotify. Part 3. I am a vinyl fetishist, or at least I used to be. This is typically the first or second thing people notice about me when they walk into my office upstairs. They notice my nice collection of records. The second thing they notice is what my favorite movie is. I joke with friends and fellow posters and online fan communities for the bands I enjoy that I am in vinyl recovery. Just yesterday, while reviewing this seminar, I was distracted by the 5th, 6th, and 7th variant of Coheed and Cambria's latest album, The Father of Make Believe, coming in the form of Transparent, Purple Splatter, and the Nebula Red deluxe editions, all for an album that came out earlier this year. I don't begrudge any artist at any level finding ways to make a living or a fortune, depending on the stratosphere in which any particular artist is operating. But there is an alarming trend of more albums that are the same songs. Take, for example, Taylor Swift, who is arguably most visibly and the most popular artist, arguably, in the history of popular music. Her latest album, For a Few More Weeks, the 2024's The Tortured Poets Department, which, by the way, as a poet and English professor, doesn't quite capture the experience authentically, regardless of what various viral social media engagement posts may suggest, has a staggering 80 different versions, 20 of which are vinyl. Lest it seems I am taking the cliched male music critic point of view of casting judgment on women in popular music, consider that Jack White, former lead singer and guitarist of the Detroit garage rock band The White Stripes, has built around him an entire boutique industry of novelty vinyl releases to such a degree that he had to open his own vinyl pressing plant in Detroit, Michigan, the first of its kind to be built in the United States after decades of the physical format's temporary obsolescence. The hobby of collecting is a perfectly fine thing to do. And while even the most ardent fan bases in the world are starting to turn against their musicians and heroes for the exploitative, or at least terribly expensive, endless releases, I still had to get out. I found the objects were cheapening my experience with the artwork themselves. Suddenly, I was chasing the vinyl colorway and not appreciating the songs themselves. Jack White tells us music is sacred, and yet I'd been turned upside down. Wasn't the physical object of the album the right way to engage with the music? I imagine myself Montag silently judging people for their ease of use with streaming services like Spotify, while I relish the laborious process of putting on a vinyl, the physical space the equipment takes up, the labor of rising it to flip over when 18 to 22 minutes of music have passed, before thoughtfully taking in the other side. Nobody is listening the way I think people should be listening. In my classes, I am teaching students about close reading. I tell them to notice. Isn't this also the best practice for taking in music, a thing that I find to be sacred? Could the digital music listeners at least own their music instead of paying a company the privilege to stream the library, at least for the sake of the artists they supposedly love? Now, it is worth stating plainly, I have evolved beyond this foolish perspective. But I still think there is something to be said about intentionality in how we engage with art, in this case with music. Adhering to an exclusively vinyl diet of music, if nothing else, is utterly impractical. Some of my favorite music memories of late have been sing-alongs in the car with my son Benjamin, and the way a toddler dances at home or in a car seat are not compatible with the sensitivity of a turntable. Nobody is listening, I might instruct myself in Montag, because we are looking at it wrong. Dr. Fox's lecture on interpretive practices for literary analysis suggests that the purpose of close reading or analysis is not to search for hidden meanings. Our texts are not puzzles you need to solve. We don't need to interrogate the books we're reading. We simply need to notice them better, the way Montag might be stifled in his daily life by this puzzling, or the way I was searching for meaning merely in objects. But rather, Dr. Fox encourages us that we should improve the quality of attention we give a text, whether that is a vinyl record, an MP3, or a song we're playing off of YouTube. The improved quality of attention that we give a text allows us to engage in the process of interpretation through which we can make meaning from the world around us. I'm convinced that there is an innate aspect of human nature to be curious, to ask questions, to puzzle, as Fox names the second interpretive practice. I know that this is instinctual because Ben's favorite word to say these days is why. Compulsory schooling, teaching to the test, and gutted education budgets drills this out of our students. So by the time they enter our classrooms at the university, we have to help them rediscover their curiosity. One place to start is to respond to my all-time favorite thing students tell me in class. Hey, Dr. D, it's not that deep. Cliched bad teaching review after cliched review cite the green lantern at the end of the pier in The Great Gatsby as just being a light. The color of the curtain is the color that the author thought of when they were writing that sentence, and nothing more. Sure, there's something to be said about the tediousness of over-analysis, but isn't there something more to be said about using literary analysis, about engaging with texts of any genre and any art form to learn about what makes us human? Phil Elverum describes A Crow Looked at Me as an exploration of cold mechanics of sickness and loss, which are real and inescapable and can bring an alienating, detached sharpness. But it is not the thing I want to remember. A crow did look at me. There is an echo of John Vier that still rings, a reminder of the love and infinity beneath this obliteration. It is that deep. And if the it isn't the favorite novel being taught by an English professor, let it be something else that's meaningful to you. As I have found meaning in Mount Erie, maybe our students have found meaning in their own pop culture artifacts. Nobody listens anymore. Let's prove Montag wrong. I shared a brief survey with students because I was curious about their listening habits to see if they are representative of the findings in Liz Pelly's work of journalistic nonfiction Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Costs of a Perfect Playlist, which was the exigence of this whole project. More on that in a bit. 15 of my 15 volunteer respondents said yes, they listen to music. Only 3 of those respondents use Spotify, though between YouTube Music, Apple Music, and other streaming platforms, 0% of the students said the primary way they listen to music is on a physical format, and 100% of their responses represent a streaming platform as opposed to digital ownership. No judgment, just collecting information. As to when students commonly listen to music, except for respondent 5, who said, quote, better question, when do I not listen to music, with a laugh emoji. All of the respondents said their listening is usually complementing other activities ranging from walking to class, in the car, in my free time, or even when I study or read. I hope that respondent is listening to instrumentals. One respondent said they listen to music, quote, when I'm alone or feeling down, as the most common time they listen to music, which affirms this common loneliness, this common downness, the power of engagement with art, even if the art is grim or the person engaging with the art is feeling grim, because art can be a reflection of our reality and another way to productively concretize and outwardly express the messy and abstract feelings we hold within. The genres of music students listen to is widely varied, but representative of the top charting music according to Billboard stat tracking and promoted playlists on Spotify and Apple Music. On a scale from 1 to 10, over 60% of the respondents said that music was between 8 and 10 for important in their lives. And their rationale consistently related to things like emotional regulation or the powerful experiences listening can provide. Only 3 of the respondents said, on the same scale, that they were engaged between the levels of 8 and 10. Responses fell into 2 camps here. First, it helps me to concentrate when studying. Without it, I can't pay attention, and is similarly useful for students who use music while multitasking. Or the second camp, I take listening to music as an experience. Students explained this by defining a good listener as, quote, being able to understand and comprehend what a person is saying, or, quote, someone who hears and understands, or, quote, being able to take things and to analyze everything that is being said. What we see consistently here is that despite the multitasking, these respondents are valuing close attention, not unlike the kind of close reading and analysis the interpretive practices introduce in freshman English, mind you, into their experience. Attention and engagement are key terms. My favorite responses are what the students responded to the question, what is the purpose of music in your life and in your culture? The most poetic response was, quote, to give color to life with sound. I like that. And the most succinct was a way to escape. What do we think? Is Montag wrong? I'll skip to a major conclusion, which is that the modality or the exigence behind a listener's experience with music doesn't really matter. I wonder, though, if there is value in an even greater heightened experience to listening to music, intentionally a kind of close reading of a musical text. I also wonder if this small sample size of 15 gracious Ohio Dominican freshmen is representative of some broader trends in musical consumption. Part 4, music makes you lose control. This is how the song Lose Control by Missy Elliott begins. For those unfamiliar with Spotify, the platform is an app-based program, mostly accessed on personal devices, cell phones, tablets, laptops, etc., to stream music. Instead of users uploading physical media into a digital space, like early music file management tools, such as iTunes, making it possible for users to rip or copy their CDs into their computer hard drives, or by purchasing digital music files, like later iTunes, which monopolized the digital media market by the end of the first decade of the 21st century. Users on Spotify have access to a massive streaming library that operates like an on-demand radio, with seemingly every song you could ever want to listen to by almost every artist you've ever heard of or could even imagine, with nothing more than a monthly subscription and an internet connection. It seemed to be a platform designed for serious lovers of music, made by serious lovers of music. In its early days, Spotify felt like nothing short of a miracle. Liz Pelly's book, Mood Machine, comprehensively outlines the origins of Spotify and the rapid pivot from its utopian origins to what it has become today as a major cultural influencer and benefactor to the development of AI, drones, weapons, technology. Dystopian, more like. Initially, Spotify was uninterested in curation, marketing itself as a blank canvas users could project their taste upon. In 2011, when the platform launched in the United States, CEO and founder Daniel Ek was already walking back the vision of Spotify he'd sold during its successful European launch, that his company is, quote, essentially the Google of music. As early as 2012, instead of offering a wide and easily accessible menu of all music by all artists, representative of global genres and varying levels of fame and fortune, Spotify was searching for ways to compete with the pre-existing competition in the American market, things like Pandora Radio, Napster, and Google Music, to name a few. Spotify explored user data to help understand playlists, arrangements of songs user-selected or platform-curated, not unlike the cultural memory we have of mixtapes and mixed CDs, that was based on, quote, preset moods like sensual, tender, happy, and angry. Early attempts at curation based on the close study of user data and listening habits were not themselves impactful, but helped shape the future vision of the company. An insider described to Pelly, quote, at first, Spotify really thought they were competing with iTunes, the digital marketplace where users could buy albums for $9.99, which was nearly half the price of a new release CD, or just the individual songs they wanted for 99 cents each. But, the insider continues, rather than having the music on your hard drive, it was streaming. But having done the study, they realized that active listening was a smaller part of the experience. There were way more listening hours using music as a background experience, people who wanted to lean back and let Spotify choose things. They started to optimize for that experience, for a less engaged user, to make music consumption even more seamless. There's a lot to unpack here. First, that Spotify diminishes music listening to consumption, a crass commodification of the art the platform is supposedly making more accessible to wider audiences and listeners. Then there is the seeming disregard for the listener, both in terms of anti-consumer, finding ways to undercut digital ownership of music, and in terms of using surveillance to heavily dictate the user experience. After the internal terminology of lean-back listeners takes hold within the culture of Spotify, CEO Daniel Ek amends his previous no curation approach. Pelly is wise to remind readers that the origin of the word playlist is not in the nostalgia of cassette mixtapes or burnt CDs, but rather a radio industry term inextricably tied to capitalism and major label payola for airtime for artists. Instead of radio play now, major labels would be buying placement on influential playlists as Spotify moved further into a curation machine instead of an equitable jukebox. What had first arrived as a solution to meeting wide audiences' unique needs and interests was returning to the don't touch that dial strategy from a big media playbook and modernizing it to reflect the omnipresent surveillance and data farming that users were willingly engaged in on Spotify. Quote, playlists don't just respond to users' musical interests, but manufacture them too. In 2005, 1 year before Spotify's launch in Sweden, Missy Elliott rapped over Fat Man Scoop's repeated hook, "Music makes you lose control. Music makes you lose control." This is not what they meant in that song. Pelly outlines a lot of history in Mood Machine, tracking the prominence of playlists as Spotify's primary mode of delivery for music and for curation. These evolved from the user-generated playlists, which were the closest to the nostalgia of mixtapes, to allowing users to follow influential playlist makers, playlists by genre and the disconnect between the makers of genres of music and the determiners of those genres at Spotify, playlists by mood, which further entrenched the lean-back listener into their passive consumption, editorial playlists that were at least curated by living, breathing human beings at Spotify, and then finally arriving at the dystopian nightmare of entirely AI-generated music to fit into entirely AI-generated algorithmic mood playlists for listeners who were not even listening. Internal sources told Pelly the emergence of sleep playlists, for example, quote, proved to Spotify that they are not a music company. They're a time filler for boredom. According to data observed by a source who worked at Spotify, Pelly reports that, quote, there was only a tiny percent of lean-in listeners. The vast majority of music listeners, they're not really interested in listening to music per se. They just need a soundtrack to a moment in their day. I'm interested in this binary, lean back versus lean in. My knee-jerk reaction is to quote Lester Bangs once more, who said, quote, the ultimate sin of any performer is contempt for the audience. While Daniel Ek and Spotify are not performers definitionally, they are engaged in a deceptive shadow play that I believe is at odds with the very nature of the common good. Consider that in the short history of Spotify, through massive surveillance and data mining, users' experiences are cynically curated, a sort of disingenuous contempt for their listeners to maximize Spotify's profits, be that through ad revenue, massive deals with major record labels that screw over tiny independent musicians, or by courting relationships with AI tech companies, using their AI to do a lot more harm than producing shitty copies of authentic music to manufacture inauthentic experiences that resemble but are not the human experience. As editorial playlists' prominence waned, quote, certain elements of Spotify's lean-back environment were only growing more pervasive as personalization took a stronger hold on the product. Music as utility, music as mood stabilizer, click here for happy, click here for sad, click here for chill out study beats. Again, sorry to my students who are here that have not finished Fahrenheit 451 yet, but this is exactly the type of person the tyrannical government and the dystopian society that burns books and murders ideological diversity aims to produce as a model citizen, like Guy Montag's tragic wife, Mildred. You guys can write about that in your papers. Nobody listens anymore, Montag says. Daniel Ek, exploiting the lean-back listeners, said at a company meeting that, quote, Apple Music, Amazon, those aren't our competitors. Our only competitor is silence. Nobody listens, indeed. 5, There has to be common ground between the pretentious and fetishization of expensive and environmentally harmful vinyl overproduction and the lowest bidder of a thoughtless lean-back listener recursively catering to the manufacture of their own tastes. I believe that art, authentic and really powerful art, can serve the common good by providing a framework for communities to work through a whole range of human experiences, not just joy and frivolity, though these are terribly important expressions to share, to celebrate, and to relate to, but also pain, also suffering, also trauma, and also collective grief. Music can be a common good. And to language's metaphor here, I do not mean good in the commercial sense, but good as in the feeling you get after opening a jar of your grandmother's canned applesauce on a fall morning. It serves the common good to lean in to the art that we engage with. A lean-in listener is one who engages with aspects of the interpretive practices, one who does a close reading with the texts they connect to. What I am saying is that not only does freshman English serve as an important role in the preparation of college students in the humanities, but that it serves an important role in the continued formation of human beings who may choose to connect with popular culture in order to productively wrestle with life's greatest mystery, death. Oops. Part 6. The ultimate sin of any performer is contempt for the audience. Being a lean-in listener is an act of love, particularly when we are faced with challenging art. In 2017, barely a year after the passing of his wife, Phil Elverum toured Mount Erie's newest songs. Being a lean-in artist is also an act of difficult and painful love, but it is human to feel. Elverum describes the tour, performing material from A Crow Looked at Me. Every time it was clear that audiences shared the same apprehensions that I had. After the first song, every time there was a palpable hanging question in the air. Should we clap? It's a good question. What is this? Is this entertainment? What is applause for? What kind of ritual is this? Many close friends have still not listened to the records or come to a concert. What beyond pain is embodied here? I don't exactly know what my job is, traveling around and delivering these feelings. Concerts in 2017 and 2018 have been unusual, unexplainable, and great. The best of these shows featured songs not only from A Crow Looked at Me, but also from a companion album, Now Only, which is described as a deeper exploration of that style of candid, undisguised lyrical writing. These songs continue to challenge listeners with their textual simplicity, but are sonically less plain. The title track, Now Only, despite its intense lyrics, sounds like a pop song. Imagine what these lines sound like in the context of a song. People get cancer and die. People get hit by trucks and die. People just living their lives get erased for no reason with the rest of us watching from the side. And some people have to survive and find a way to feel lucky to still be alive, to sleep through the night. Think again of the interpretive practices. What do you notice in these lyrics? Do you notice pain? Do you notice irony? Do you notice sorrow? Puzzle over what you are noticing. And now let's hear a bit of the song. But only a bit. Earlier, I asked if this background was necessary for enjoying the music. The rhetorician in me would say, yes, of course, context matters. We know that texts do not occur in a vacuum. The world impresses upon the text, and the text reflects that impression back upon the world. Lloyd Bitzer tells us that rhetoric is situational. Art, albums, now only, by Mount Erie, is a rhetorical text, and it comes into existence for the sake of something beyond itself. It functions ultimately to produce action or to produce change in the world. Bitzer goes on to describe rhetoric as a mode of altering reality by the creation of discourse which changes reality through the mediation of thought and action. Song and lyrics in Elverum's case. The rhetor alters reality by bringing into existence a discourse of such a character that the audience in thought and action is so engaged that it becomes the mediator of change. This is why the live album capturing these shows by Mount Erie, entitled After, there is a palpable connection between the text and the audience, author and reader, that can only occur in an intentional listening environment in a shared communal space. This environment of collective grief and experience is a physical manifestation of the common good, and the physical object of the recording of this show doubles down on its tangible impact. The second question I asked earlier was if we, the audience, have a right to engage with music this personal. One last return to Lester Bangs. If a performer's contempt for his audience is the greatest sin, what do we call it if the performer engages in a profound and excruciating disclosure of the human experience, anything other than a sublime virtue? And not only that, the performer also does so publicly, builds community around that disclosure, attempts to alter reality. Not the reality of the performer's departed wife, but the reality of the alienation of suffering the loss of a loved one, something we may all be able to share in order to produce some change in the world. Elverum himself says, yes, you can hear the breath in the room. You can feel the simultaneous intimacy and immensity. Phil Elverum calls this catharsis. I call this listening. Guy Montag calls this listening. I call this leaning in. And I believe if we lean in more, if we purposefully select pop culture texts to close read, to notice and puzzle over, that these things are that deep. I call this kind of intentionality a necessary engagement in the human condition, and an engagement that helps to foster the common good, even when that engagement is in the face of the immensity of death. The trilogy of albums Mount Erie released around the death of John V.A. Castry perfectly showcases the value in the exercise of lean-in listening, the need to engage in rhetorical and literary analysis of pop culture texts so that we may better understand ourselves, our lives, and continue meaning-making in the face of great and terrible chaos. We can choose to lean in. Can choose to face death with the dignity the dying deserve. In the final song on After, we hear Elverum open the song Tin Tin in Tibet with repetition like a prayer. I sing to you. I sing to you, John V.A. I sing to you. You don't exist. I sing to you, though. The art isn't futile. The art is deep. In fact, it is the opposite of futile. It is necessary. Thank you.